Okay, 6B, public hearing on our fiscal year 2007-2008 budget. We need City Council's consideration approving the fiscal year's 2007-2008 budget resolution. Councilman Peterson.
I guess I just want to state for the record that the major problem I have with this budget is the extremely large pay raises. Although Mr. Bremer has assured us that these pay raises will not go into effect until council votes for them. So I just want to clarify that it's totally accurate.
I'll respond to that in a little bit.
Okay, and then my second concern was a document that we received from Ms. Pam Lavers, our HR director, from Pam Lavers, our HR director, which implemented 2% raises retroactive for 10 non-union employees, which I don't have a problem with, but the current salaries that she had listed here didn't match the 05-06 budget. So my concern is, have these people already received raises that didn't come before council? Because to my knowledge, the only two people that did come to council were Pam Lavers and Amy Poole. And last year during budget time, council asked that the increases in salary be taken out for the non-union employees, which I was under the impression it was. And my concern is they seem to have gotten raises last year, which council didn't approve. It didn't come before council. So my question is, are these figures accurate, the current salaries that are listed here, and were raises or salary increases given last year?
I can just comment on that. I don't remember the meeting where you did, and correct me if I'm wrong for council that was here. When we approved the budget, we approved the budget with all the numbers. All we stated was we wanted him to take the money and put it aside, and he was to do actual processes of valuation of performance. It didn't necessarily mean that was going to be the number. It could have been more, it could be less. He had to shift it around. But the number was just shifted in the budget till he did that. Once he did the performance, then the raises were in effect. We just didn't want it across the board. We wanted to evaluate. That was the way I understood it.
So we gave raises last year without coming to council. I mean,
no, we approved the budget last year with the numbers in it.
Mr. Bremer just told me at the last meeting, at the budget meeting, that if we approve this budget, that does not mean that those pay increases are a for sure thing.
This is last year's budget.
I know, that's what I'm talking. These people, these people never came. This was never brought to council for these pay raises.
You're remembering it different than I did.
Well, why are we giving retroactive 2% pay increases to people who already got raises then?
No, last year it was in our budget. We took the money and we budgeted it, but we didn't allocate it because we wanted him to do performance evaluations. Well, the money just stayed aside. Now he finished the evaluations, so now the money is being paid before, so he can close out the 06-07 budget so we can get into the 07-08. That's a closeout, but we all approved, at least that's my understanding, the money was in the budget, the dollar amount was concluded, we approved it. He just needed to do the performance evaluation, which he's completed now, unless council remembers it differently.
They still needed to come before council and be approved for salary increases for non-union employees and department heads.
Does anybody remember it the way Councilman Peterson does?
When we went through the budget process last time, matter of fact, we talked at length because the 2% was already into it. And when we went through that, we talked about the 2% being into it. We said, okay, that's what we were going, that was based on the performance reviews, and this is actually the first performance reviews. Remember we talked about this the first time, that non-union members, department heads had to go through a performance review, I think, for the first time in the city's history. And after that, at that point in time, it was the dollar amount was 2% per employee, but he could, based on his evaluation, he could move it up or down, but there was no more than that 2% bucket that was there
for the individual.
Then that was because we had already approved that on the last budget in the 06-07 budget, not
right.
The 07.
And not only did we approve a dollar amount not to exceed the number he gave us, it actually was less by the time he did his evaluations, and the money he set aside that we approved for the budget last year actually was less. We actually had more money. What was the number that you budgeted?
It was 11,000 last year, and these 10 raises was 14,
After the
13.
public portion of the meeting is done, I'm going to address those things.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'm going to provide you with a clear understanding of what Human Resource Director has responsibility and authority to do and what has actually taken place. Because you throw around 35% raises, and that's not correct.
Okay. Okay, we'll let you go into that. But I just wanted to say for the record.
My concern was, why are we giving a 2% retroactive increase in salary to these non-union employees and department heads that already received a raise last year?
Because we approved it last year. We approved it last year. Councilman
And you don't give
Sexauer?
a retroactive pay raise when you gave them another one.
Okay. Is that it?
I was at the one budget meeting that was required to look over this very well-prepared budget we were presented with. And I don't think it's happened in many years where a council has sat down with a city manager, a city attorney, and reviewed a budget and found it to be a good budget. I think our city manager's office, our city manager and assistant city manager have done a heck of a job preparing this budget. I understand what happened with the raises, and I guess maybe I interpret things differently than some other people. But I would like to make a motion.
Well, I have to go to public
All
hearing
right,
first.
when you're done,
and I'll let
I'd
you
like to
come back.
make a motion.
Okay. You may.
And another thing too, Mayor Lang, I'm sorry I wasn't finished. We have good employees in our city. These people put their hearts out there. They work. They're doing extra jobs. They're filling the holes that we've had to leave open. And it's an old saying, and I know anyone that's ever been in business knows that you get what you pay for. I mean, we're not giving people massive raises and tremendous benefits. We're just keeping things normal and keeping our good employees on the job. I don't think you can ask them to do much more work. I mean, they're out there every day. We got to work with it. We have to work with these people because they're good people, they're hard workers, and they deserve to be compensated.
I agree. Thank you. I'm going to open a public hearing. It is now 9:04. Does anybody like to speak on the budget? I'm going to come up, state your name and address.
Barbara Jennings, 312210. I did give a speech at the budget meeting, but since a lot of people at home don't watch that meeting, wasn't highly publicized, I'm going to say pretty much the same thing I said before, but a little briefer. The equipment rental fund, the city manager has proposed transferring over $220,000. Barbara Jennings, 312210. I did give a speech at the budget meeting, but since a lot of people at home don't watch that meeting, wasn't highly publicized, I'm going to say pretty much the same thing I said before, but a little briefer. The equipment rental fund, the city manager has proposed transferring over $220,000 to beef up this fund because it's running out of money. First, we have lost 22 employees, as he said. Has there been a corresponding cut in the number of vehicles? Every vehicle uses gas, requires insurance and maintenance, and we could save tens of thousands a year by selling some of these vehicles. This is something I've said many years, and I still feel strongly about this. Second, almost 1/3 of the equipment rental budget goes to the salaries and fringe of 2 mechanics, about $180,000. When I looked into whether these men worked full-time, it appears not from the data I was able to obtain. So if my data is accurate, a better figure would be to charge 1 1/4 men to the equipment rental fund, saving approximately $65,000. So in my opinion, that by cutting the number of vehicles and cutting the staffing charge to this item, you could reduce costs by close to $100,000. Okay. Legacy costs is something else. The city manager has urged council to start funding medical costs for future retirees. And it is now the law that it has to be included in our budget. And I agree with him and believe we can put at least $500,000 in that fund this year. As Mr. Bremer has said, we are currently running under budget in this fiscal year and can expect to have approximately $400,000 surplus. Also, we have $2.5 million in the fund balance left over from previous years. So now is the time to put the money where it will buy us and our employees some peace of mind so we can pay their future medical costs. The water department. Another water rate increase is being proposed. There are some aspects of this budget that I still take exception to. You have again charged $287,000 to the equipment rental fund, a figure that is not substantiated by data. 3 years ago, Tom Van Dam started a study to determine the correct amount, and the study was never completed. The water budget, in my opinion, the water budget continues to pay more than its fair share and subsidizes other city operations. You have put $900,000 into the capital improvement budget item for the second year in a row, even though the 7-year average is about $200,000. Last year we budgeted over $900,000 and only spent about $400,000, leaving a surplus of about $500,000, which is good. Also, there is no detail provided to explain what you intend to do with the $900,000. And in the past, the detail was provided. So I feel that that this, capital improvement is at least $500,000 over what it should be. Lastly, I estimate last year that you could save approximately $75,000 a year by having year-round part-time water meter readers. Okay, it's ways to cut the water budget. Non-union salaries raises. Well, kind of hard to talk about this because I know Mr. Bremer has a lot to say. I tried to figure out what happened with these salaries. When I was going through the budget, everything seemed really high, so I got out 3 years of budgets. And I pretty much stand by the figures that I presented at the budget meeting. Because if you compare 2005 and 2006 salaries of the non-union personnel to this year's budget, there was an increase of about $125,000 in salary and $100,000 in pension. In 06-07, council did not give any raises and took the 2% out of the budget. I was at that meeting, and I don't remember any authorization to Mr. Bremer to give raises. You took it out of the budget. I have a letter to that regard that it was being held in abeyance, but I never saw anything saying, go ahead, Mr. Bremer, give raises. So this means that either sometime in the past 2 years, there have been 14 people either received raises, not authorized by council, or will receive them after this budget is adopted. So Mr. Bremer said in newspaper, these raises are an average of $9,000 per person. No, he said 9%. And it's really more than a 16% average, $9,000 per person. The big problem is raises to 8 of these people are regulated by our charter, Section 4.6, because they are administrative officers, and compensation must be fixed by council. This did not come to council. My time up?
1 minute.
1 minute.
Oh, okay. If any of these people have already received raises, this is a violation of our charter, and these should be rescinded. I served on council for 4 years, and during this time, council determined the union contracts they had to approve and the non-union raises. I've talked to former mayors and council people, and it's always been done that way in the city. The council determines compensation. That's one of our jobs. So I don't understand. Now, Mr. Bremer's going to talk about this new HR director. I thought I read that, but I don't remember reading anything in there that now we have administrators authorized to give raises, and but directors of departments, that's a violation of the charter. It's in there that council must approve compensation for, I have a copy of the charter, and I'm sure Mr. Dolan has it too. You know Section 4.6. Compensation must be set by council. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to speak on it? Sure. Come on up.
Gil Harris, 15863 Kingston. A number of years ago, I did serve on this council, and I've seen some things go up and down. I will tell you that the professionalism of this current council and of the current administration is above and beyond anything I've ever seen. I absolutely object to people sitting back and trying to micromanage something that we pay an extremely highly qualified manager to do. It's ridiculous. You know, we're not here to micromanage. The city actually has got a surplus. What other cities can say that? I think it's our job to be supportive of the extremely fine job that this council and administration is doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else like to speak on this? All righty, I'm going to close public hearing. It is now 9:11. And I'm going to bring it back up to City Manager Jeff Bremer.
Thank you very much. I feel compelled to provide a discussion in response to statements that were made just now and also during the public participation section of the April 25th special meeting. Now, you're going to find this to be somewhat surprising because I've really never done this before in terms of responding to comments that have been made during that portion of the meeting. However, the importance of the comments and the statements that were made have compelled me to do this. I'm the budget officer for the city, and the proposed budget that you have is the product of my work. And I take that work seriously, and I take seriously comments and the use of my data that are designed to suggest and create an atmosphere that I have not done my job. Comments made by Barbara Jennings at tonight's meeting and at April 25th meeting really is designed and to give statements and data and convey it in such a way that creates a picture, in my opinion, that misdirects, misinterprets, misinforms those who watch our meetings. And finally, since I was asked by the press, and I'm reminded of a statement that Mrs. Jennings made in my office when she announced that she would not seek another term, and that was, I can do more harm off council than I can on. Mrs. Jennings made statements at that budget hearing and tonight, and those statements include moving employees into the equipment revolving fund. Non-union employees have been given raises as high as 35%, creating morale problems when union employees are only receiving 2%. It looks misleading to the people what he has to say, implying a lack of honesty in the budgeting process, that I have inflated numbers, that I have created slush funds, that I have provided inaccurate budget figures, that I have canceled studies, that I have stated and provided wrong information, such as projecting a deficit in the water fund when there will be a surplus, and other comments and use of data which, when combined, suggest that something is wrong with the budgeting process in the city of Fraser. Now, Mrs. Jennings is a smart individual. She knows how to use data. Okay, but we all know that the use of raw data can create whatever illusion we want to. For example, I can use data from the 04-05 and 05-06 budgets to create the following picture. In the 04-05 budget, the entire historical commission budget was eliminated. City Hall maintenance was reduced by $6,000 or 60%. Baumgartner maintenance was reduced by $1,200 or 80%. Library maintenance was eliminated, a reduction of $5,000. DPW maintenance was eliminated, a reduction of $15,000. Park maintenance was eliminated, a reduction of $15,000, which, by the way, is the funding for Fort Fraser, among other park maintenance needs. Library books and materials reduced by $22,500 or 47%, and the Activity Center capital was eliminated. Then Councilwoman Jennings voted for this budget. 2005-2006 budget. I budgeted an additional $12,000 for needed City Hall repair maintenance, a 300% increase. I budgeted $2,000 for maintenance for the Historical House. I budgeted $3,000 for the Historical Commission, restoring funding for the Historical House. I restored maintenance funds for the library in the amount of $15,000. I restored maintenance funds for the DPW in the amount of $10,000. I restored maintenance funds in the amount of $20,000 for park maintenance, of which over $7,000 was provided for the maintenance of Fort Fraser. I budgeted an additional $23,000 for library personnel so they could restore full library hours. And I budgeted an additional $25,000 in books and materials for the library to restore that funding to historical levels. Then Councilwoman Jennings voted against this budget. So when we use raw data and we throw comments out and we portray it in such a way, the way that I've laid this out, it clearly shows that Mrs. Jennings is against proper maintenance of our facilities, is against the Historical Commission, is against maintaining Fort Fraser, and is against the library. So, but I know that there were other reasons for her to vote no. But you can see clearly how the use of information without an understanding of where that information comes from can be done to create a picture that is not realistic and is designed to mislead and misrepresent the facts. Now, specifically, comments were made. You know, and I'll say that it's easy to take a couple of pages of a 312-page budget document that tells the whole story and pick and choose little pieces of it when trying to show that there's something wrong with the budgeting process. You know, the equipment rental fund, okay, one car for every two employees. I don't even know what the significance of that means. I mean, we're a service organization, so we need cars in order to fulfill our needs. There is no relationship to a reduction in employees and the use of our vehicles. And quite honestly, I don't even know where she gets her data that suggests that that's a very high ratio. Where's the data that says one car for every two person is a high ratio? And besides, it's not one for two cars, it's one for every four. Okay, we have 23 cars, and 8 of those are marked patrol vehicles. To even get close to the 1-to-2 ratio, we'd have to add vehicles such as the DARE van, our prisoner support van, our water utility pickup, our fire utility pickup, and other site-specific vehicles to even come close to that type of a ratio. She states that we can save tens of thousands of dollars by selling off vehicles, but provides no plan to do so. Now, to reach just $10,000, okay, we would have to eliminate 7 cars, 4 water cars, 2 City Hall fleet cars, and 1 general transport SUV currently being used by the Economic Development Coordinator. To do that, okay, taking into consideration insurance, gas, and maintenance, that would bring us to about $9,700. So if we're going to save tens of thousands of dollars, you might as well just eliminate all of our fleet. Why don't we just eliminate some of our patrol vehicles? And because they're the highest uses of, they use $5,000 or $6,000 worth of gasoline a year. We could eliminate 2 of those and get to tens of thousands of dollars very easily. Our fleet is old. And we do not replace our fleet periodically or on only do it on an as-needed basis. For example, the 4 water cars that I cited, okay, one's a 1997, 2 are 1998, and 1 is a 1999 with a combined total mileage of 384,553 miles. Those are all hand-me-down patrol cars. Okay, the newest cars in the fleets are patrol vehicles. And as you know, the majority of those over the last 2 years have been funded through our forfeiture fund, including the purchase of our brand new fire truck, because the equipment rental fund does not have enough money to pay for the replacement of our fleet. That's a fact. She also states that the 2 highest paid employees in the DPW were moved into the equipment rental fund. First of all, they're the highest paid union employees because they're certified mechanics. Okay, second of all, there's been no movement employees into this fund. Okay, 2 mechanics have been assigned to this fund since at least 1979. In fact, all DPW employees have been historically assigned to the budgets as you see them in the 2007-2008 fiscal year. Now, we can move employees anywhere within the DPW budgets that you wish. I recall that there was a question when I first came on board, and the statement was made that there's too many employees that are assigned to the water department. I know that to be a fact by my data. Well, I went and I analyzed those hours, and it showed that not only was the amount of money being assigned to the water budget proper and appropriate based upon the number of hours. But if you take this year's data, 45% of the DPW's time has been spent on the water, where only 38% of the wages and fringes benefits have been assigned there. So if you want to take that 2/3 of an employee out of the equipment revolving fund because you got to do something, unless you're going to eliminate one full employee, then move them into the water side, okay? And it will decrease the amount of expenditures in the equipment rental fund, and we'll just increase the amount in the water side. I mean, that's the difficulty of budgeting the DPW. We can't just combine all those employees under one fund. So we historically place those employees into the various funds, knowing that, you know, as we record actual time, one year they may spend more time in one budget, one year they may spend more time in another, but on the average, we need to assign those employees appropriately. The bottom line in the equipment revolving fund is exactly what I've been saying in the last 2 years. The rental fund is in desperate shape. Okay, and no budgetary gimmickry is going to solve the problem. When $243,000, or a 30% cut, was made in the 03-04 rental fund for revenues, somebody should have known what the long-term consequences of that action would be. And those consequences are, we got $582,000. That's just enough to maintain our fleet. You can look at the numbers, you can look at the data. There is no money for the replacement of our equipment. Therefore, okay, when you take the $220,000, we're fortunate enough, by the way, to have that additional funding in the unmet need category that I've worked very hard to create, that is able to put $220,000 to bolster that fund without impacting the current rental rates from the general fund, the water fund, or the major and local street fund. Legacy cost. Put $500 to $1 million in the retirement fund to buy us and our employees peace of mind, so we can pay for their future medical costs and not go bankrupt down the road. Okay? Throws out a couple of numbers that suggest we have over $5 million in fund balances, and that's simply wrong. Okay? We have a fund balance at June 30th of 06 of $2.9 million, which is approximately 18% of our 07-08 fiscal year budget, or the equivalent of about 2.3 months of operation. If the fiscal year ends as projected, we'll add another 400, and we can either use that for unmet needs or simply add that to the present fund balance, and we'll have about a 3.3 million. So there's no way there's no 5 million any way you cut it. Okay? I don't disagree with strategies regarding our legacy costs. I pointed this out over the last 2 years. Okay, but how we pay for that is a question. As I pointed out, we're paying $1.2 million now for our current retirees. And also based on a post-retirement health care coverage actuarial valuation that was done in 2001, we need between 15.3 and 36.5% of payroll annually to cover this legacy cost. This means annually between $932,000 and $2.2 million that we would have to put in to meet our legacy cost. $500,000 to $1 million, you know, it's a great thing, and it's a positive step forward. But when you look at the amount of contributions required between 2001, when the report was prepared, and 2050, it ranges from $58 million to $142 million. So, again, we can put $500 to $1 million in it, but that's a one-time shot, and it doesn't get us anywhere close to dealing with this legacy cost. And then also the issue, it raises the issue of who pays. I mean, is the suggestion made that the city should completely assume that entire burden? Or should the employees assume some of that burden, as many of the private sector employees have already done? I pay 2% of my pay to pre-fund my retirement medical. I'm the only person in the city to do that. Okay, I proposed a 1% employee contribution during negotiations, and they flatly said no. Non-union raises. Okay, saw some pretty hefty raises this year in the budget for non-union employees. Some were over 35%. Claims that it's a $9,000 average for 14 employees. Claims that the pension costs went up by $100,000. The raises were $125,000 for a $225,000 increase. That's a fantasy figure, and it's absolutely incorrect. Okay, you all know, and you all sit up here, and you receive that confidential memo from the Human Resources Director that said that we were going to proceed with 2% increases for the employees.
Yes, we did.
And that if there was objections to that, that you were to so note it and we would place it on the agenda. Every one of you except for one came in, and maybe perhaps two, said that they were fine and comfortable with that increase. Okay? Now, the 35% raises. There were no 35% raises. Okay? There were adjustments, however, that were made by the Human Resources Director in exactly the same fashion as were made with Interim Director George Ruhib. Okay?
But you came to council with
When I informed you in a update memo of the decision to appoint George Ruhib as the interim director and with a pay increase commensurate with those increased duties and responsibilities. Now, looking at the 14, I'm going to just dispel this $100,000. I'm going to dispel this $9,000 right now. I did the same thing. I went back in the budget and I looked at the 6/30/05/06 numbers. Okay, and by the way, okay, the 14 was 16. We're down 2 non-union employees, and it has saved over $281,000 in expenditures. So we're down to 14. I took a look at grand totals in the 05/06. I also took a look at the current, and I took a look at the 2% increase. Any way that you cut it, it's not a $9,000 average increase. Okay, it's not. And if you look at the average for each one of these 14 people, the average pay for the 14 non-union people, those are the people that make this city run, that help provide you the information to make solid decisions that you have made in the past. Okay, the average includes myself and all department heads and Pam is $62,234. Comparing that to a salary of a public safety officer who would, if they were to have received the same type of increase that the other unions would have agreed to, they would have been making $61,600. That's a $633 difference. Our department heads are not overpaid. Our department heads are in no way overcompensated. 35% adjustments, yeah, I can say that there was a 35% adjustment, and it was made in the finance department. And that was as a result of Pat Jameson retiring. And when Pat Jameson retired, as you know, in the staff reduction and staff reorganization memo that I gave, that once Pat retired, her position would not be replaced. They're down one supervisor out of 3. Jan Robichaud, who was the deputy, was made the interim director, and the Human Resources Director gave her an interim salary commensurate with the increased responsibilities. That's an interim pay, done exactly the way it was done with George Ruhib. Okay? If that position is to be made permanent, then that pay will be brought to you, and that recommendation to appoint the finance director pursuant to the charter will be done. That's the reason for it. And by the way, the union employees didn't get a 2%, they got a 2.5% increase. So that's pretty much what I have to say about that. There was no 220. And in fact, if you look at the absolute figures, the payroll for this group in 05/06 was $912,181. The payroll for this group for 07/08 is $858,128. It's less than it was in the 05/06 budget. Pension costs in the 05/06 budget were $264,804. In the 07/08 budget, $271,000. Okay, that's about less than a 2% increase in that. So, you know, where she gets her numbers, and I'll be glad to sit down with anybody and show these absolute numbers right here out of the budget that verifies these figures. There is no $225,000. Some of our employees creating a morale problem, okay, well, I'd ask where that morale problem came from and who started that morale problem, because it didn't come from me. Water and sewer fund, okay? Mrs. Jennings stated clearly that there's a $333,000 surplus in the water fund for the 07-08 fiscal year, and said it looks misleading to people what he has to say. That's wrong. Okay? If you look at the budget estimates for the 06-07 fiscal year, it clearly shows revenues of $3,980,547 and expenditures of $4,277,754. That's the fact. Okay? These numbers show a deficit, projected deficit of $297,207. The budget narrative for water and sewer states, on a bad news note, the estimate for 06-07 fiscal year shows that we will encounter deficit of close to $300,000 in this fund. There's no misleading statement in any way. That's a fact. Okay? And in fact, if you read further, it may be closer to $500,000 deficit. There is no surplus. Okay? If you read the narrative, you'll understand that. And she states that, you know, we're charging enough money to cover our costs. That also is inaccurate. If you look at the budget narrative, I've suggested actually we need a 6.86% increase in our water rates rather than the 3.59 recommended. But we kept it to the 3.59 by trimming other expenses. Okay? There's no inaccurate figures. There's no inflated slush funds in this budget or in any of the 312 pages of the budget. The $287,000 equipment rental in the water sewer fund, which she calls a fantasy figure, it's been at this level since the 03-04 fiscal year. It's remained at that level since that time. Prior to that, it's been as high as $338,000. Prior to her allegation, I canceled a study. I didn't cancel any study. Okay? The finance department put that on hold because they assumed water billing responsibilities. They had staff training to do. Pat Jamison's here. If you want to ask her to verify that, I canceled no study. And quite honestly, that study is beyond the capability of our staff. If you want to pay $12,000 to $15,000, you can do that through Plant Moran. But I look at it this way. You know, there is some logic between this $287,000. Okay? And the two highest contributing for the rental funds are logically the police department and logically the water department. And the reason for the water department is that we have a sewer vac that runs upwards of $300,000 and needs to be replaced every 10 years. Okay, we have dump trucks that need to be replaced every 8 years at $105,000. We have $75,000 backhoes that need to be replaced every 12 years. We have $60,000 sewer jet. Okay. These equipment need to be replaced more than our 2 fire trucks that can last as long as 25 years and don't require as high a contribution. So logically, without the data, it makes sense that since the largest pieces of equipment and the majority of those equipment that are used in the water fund are expensive, it makes sense. But if you want to spend the $12,000 to $15,000, put it on the agenda. We'll have it done. I would hazard a guess that it won't be too different than the $287,000. But the bottom line is, the money we're charging isn't enough. It's not enough to replace our fleet. So you want to move $287,000 out of the water fund? Okay, move it. Move it into the general fund. We'll just increase the millage rate to compensate for that increased cost. It's 6 of one, half dozen of another. You can say we're going to save $65,000 by saving 2/3 of an employee. What are you going to do with 2/3 of an employee? You got to put them somewhere, or else you eliminate another employee in a department that's already taken 6 full-time employee hits. We absolutely use part-time employees to read our meters year-round. B.J. Van Fletteren will sit here. Pat Jamison will verify that. We've used part-time employees for at least the last 3 years. Do we use full-time employees periodically? Yes, we do. We use them for filling. But primary meter readers are part-timers. And those full-time employees, by the way, they don't make $40 an hour. They make $22 an hour. Okay? So the $40, you know, and even if you add in their fringe benefits, I can only come up with 31. So, you know, if somebody's making $40 an hour, then they probably got that in an authorized manner too. In the final analysis, this budget is a sound and accurate budget. There's no fantasy figures. There's no inaccurate budget numbers. There's not wrong information. There's not less than honest budgeting. There's no canceled studies. There's no misleading information or slush funds in this budget. These words, again, were used, in my opinion, to misdirect, misinform, and raise the specter of impropriety in the budgeting process. I do, however, agree with the final statement that Mrs. Jennings made on the 25th, that we have fought for the last 4 years to stay as good as we are now. Thank you.